Kathleen James is running for re-election to the State House of Representatives seat she won in 2018. She is one of three candidates in the Democratic Party's primary election to be held on August 11th. The district, known as Bennington 4, is a two-member district and includes the towns of Manchester, Arlington, Sandgate, and most, though not all, of Sunderland. The top two vote-getters in the August primary will go on to compete in the general election in November, where the other current representative, Cynthia Browning, will also be on the ballot, running as an independent candidate. We had a chance to discuss her re-election bid with Representative James recently, and she talked about her past 2 years at the State House and the main issues she hopes to emphasize.
Well, like a lot of people in Vermont and around the country, I was really inspired to run by the 2016 election of Donald Trump and its fallout. I was motivated by policy issues. There were things like affordable childcare, paid family leave, and finding smart, strategic ways to fight climate change in a way that promotes a sustainable and renewable economy. Because those are the good-paying, fast-growing jobs of the future. And I felt like some of the issues that mattered to me weren't being talked about or weren't being focused on. But more importantly to me, I had kind of a personal reason for running, which is that I'm a Democrat, but I grew up in a very strongly Republican family. And in the time of Donald Trump, I really did not like the way that Americans were talking to each other and talking about politics, especially on social media. And so I ran for office in part because even at the local level, even here in our community and here in Vermont, I wanted to try to change that. I guess I wanted to be part of the solution and maybe try to prove to myself or try to prove to other people that we could do politics differently, even if we belong to a different party, that we could treat each other with respect and try to work across the aisle. And that was something I tried to do up in Montpelier in my first term. And I feel really good about how I accomplished that. You talk about politics, and I think before you go up to Montpelier, maybe you have the view that Montpelier is like the White House or like DC, that it's some sort of partisan boxing ring. And it is not that way at all. The State House is a very respectful, very collegial workplace. People treat each other with a lot of respect. People work across the aisle, particularly in committees. Most of the bills that leave committees leave on a unanimous or close to unanimous vote. My committee, the Education Committee, we work together extremely well. And so that was a great introduction to me and how things work up in Montpelier. You get to know your Republican colleagues, and you like them and you respect them and you talk to them all the time about their views. Another way I tried to get to know colleagues from other communities and from other parties was to get very involved in caucuses. So that was a great way that I was able to get my feet wet and really immerse myself in issues. I'm one of 7 founders of the Bipartisan Tourism Caucus. That's a Democratic and Republican group that works to raise awareness and to raise funding for tourism at the state level, which certainly helps communities like Manchester and Arlington. So helped found that caucus and have been very active with that tourism group. I'm very active in the Bipartisan Rural Economic Development Working Group, which is a rural economic group that similarly works for communities to bring awareness and work on issues that impact towns like Manchester, Arlington, Sunderland, Sandgate. I'm one of the founding members of the Social Equity Caucus that got started last year around racial and social equity issues. And then I was very proud to be elected the leadership team of the Climate Solutions Caucus, where I really try to focus on issues that impact the climate economy. I mentioned earlier that climate issues are fundamentally economic issues, and I really try to talk about climate action in the framework of the economic impact it can have and the jobs that it can bring to our state. And I was really proud to win the Vermont Conservation Voters Rising Star Award this past year. So those are the ways in which I tried to not only dive into the issues, but to work across the aisle on issues that mattered to me. So one of the bills we passed last spring was the Rural Broadband Act, and I came home over our break last summer and was watching a bunch of communities over in Windham organize around this broadband bill and form a communications union district and do all this community organizing. And so I reached out to Laura Sibilia. She's an independent rep from Dover, and one of the folks that I really admire in the legislature, and somebody I look up to kind of as a mentor. And so Laura helped me organize a forum over here this past November. And I invited Laura and Rep. Robin Chestnut Tangerman to Manchester, and we had some folks from the Department of Public Service down, and also from a rural broadband group called EC Fiber. And I publicized the forum as best I could, got the word out on Front Porch Forum and in all the local newspapers. And I was really pleased to see we had, I don't know, maybe 30 people come from communities all over Bennington County. And from that group, we formed a task force. And from that task force, we took the concept of the Southern Vermont Communications Union District to voters at town meeting this past March all over Bennington County. We formed the Southern Vermont Communications Union District by voter approval. And the Communications Union District has since won a pretty hefty grant to start planning how we can bring broadband to all the underserved roads and regions across our county. And we've just been named one of Southern Vermont's 12 vital economic projects for the southern part of the state. So I'm really proud of that work, because I kickstarted it. And it's really through the work of a lot of volunteers, It's really on a roll. And I think we saw, especially during COVID, how important broadband is to people who want to work from home, to our schools, to educators, to telehealth, to businesses. And it's something where many, many downtown centers may have great broadband, but boy, you step out, a couple houses on any given road, and you might not have connectivity. And that's a real economic issue for our state and for our communities that we need to address. So I'm really proud of that work.
We have a few minutes left, and I just wanted to also touch upon education issues, since you were on the Education Committee in the House of Representatives. An immediate issue that whoever wins in November is going to be facing would be this apparently large and gaping hole in the Ed Fund budget, driven in part by the economic consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. Roughly $100 million, as I understand it, although that number seems to shift around a lot. What are your thoughts on how that budget hole is going to be plugged? Is it simply a case of being able to use some of the federal CARES money, or is there going to have to be another way found to finance that?
Well, there's some things we know and some things we don't know. The good news, if you can say that there's good news, is that the gap in the Ed Fund has dropped significantly. The first number we saw was 170 million. The latest projection is 100 million. The other, fact we have is that the legislature and the Ways and Means Committee has stated explicitly multiple times that that gap is not going to be filled by simply putting it onto the backs of property taxpayers. At one point, I had seen that if the legislature had chosen to do that, which was never considered or never an option, it could have meant a property tax increase of 22 cents. So that was taken off the table from the get-go. In the bill we passed, the yield bill, which the legislature passes every year, there were a number of ways or options stated for how we could address the gap when we come back in the fall. And some of those ways include using federal funds if we are allowed to do that. Right now, the CARES bill doesn't allow us to do that. We're still hoping that the guidelines may change. I can't speculate on whether that might happen. I know our federal delegation is lobbying for that and hoping that it will. I'm sure every state across the nation would like for that to happen. So that's one of the ways listed in the yield bill that we could use if federal guidelines change and we're allowed to do that. Another possibility listed is borrow-in. Another possibility listed is that we could try to look for cost savings. Another possibility listed is that we could use the reserve. So I think it's too early to tell yet. One thing that we do know is that voters all over Vermont, most districts did get a budget passed at town meeting. And property tax bills for all of those districts, the vast majority of districts that did get their budget passed. Property tax bills will start going out, as soon as they can. And I think based on those budgets that voters approved, we're looking at an average, this isn't, for our district necessarily. I don't think we know yet what our specific rate will be, but the average rate is set to be about 3 cents, I think, which is significantly better, obviously, than that, 22-cent rise that the legislature ruled out from the beginning. So I guess when we come back in August, we'll have a better financial picture, and we'll start looking at those 7 options that the legislature set out in the bill that we passed, and we'll know more then.
We will be conducting a similar interview with Representative Browning shortly, and we'll get to hear her views and positions as well. For the GNAT-TV News Project, I'm Andrew McKeever.